Imagine this. You're cruising down I-85 late on a beautiful Sunday evening. Your Sunday could not have been more relaxing and stress-free. You spent time with your spouse, your dog, you got to go on a nice walk, and things are just pleasant. As I'm sure you're imagining life as a passive investor would be. Then you get this text message. Ryan, hubo una balacera en Las Trailas. La policía mató a un hombre. Now let me translate this. There was a shooting in the park. The police killed a man. All of a sudden, that relaxing Sunday turned into an all-out sprint to figure out, how can I maintain safety of my other residents? How can I communicate with the press and prevent a story from spiraling out of your control? How can we reassure our residents that their safety is our priority? And how do we make our unknown unknowns become known knowns as quickly as possible? The title of this episode is What Will Break? In this not-so-passive investment of mobile home parks, a lot of things are going to break pretty much regardless of what you do. And you better believe they won't just break during normal business hours. So, on this episode, I'm going to offer you some real-life solutions to those inevitable problems.
Warning. This podcast features the truth about owning and operating mobile home parks. The following program is not designed to be sexy. It will not hype you up on MHPs. Rather, this is a raw take on this industry and how you find your own path to success. Welcome to MHP IRL, Mobile Home Parks in Real Life, with your host, Ryan Norris.
Moments of life and death have a strange way of forcing you to focus on only what really matters to you at your core. For me, my first thoughts when I read that text message were, what can I possibly do right now in this moment to ensure my tenants are safe from any additional harm? So when I got on the phone with her, my Hispanic tenant, thank goodness she told me the police had blocked off anybody else outside a news cruise from entering the property. So with my tenants safe, at least in the moment, my mind then jumped to the next logical conclusion, which is police shootings tend to get a lot of attention from the news, especially the national news. The last thing my tenants need right now was 24/7 invasive news crews prying for any information about the latest police shooting, especially after whatever they just experienced, which I still hadn't quite figured out yet. Given this episode is about what will break, and shootings are, I promise, rare, I'm actually going to leave you with a cliffhanger on this story. And we're going to transition into something that you will experience at your mobile home park. The first thing that is guaranteed to break, the rumor mill. The people in your park and local community are going to talk about you. Although the majority of the chatter will prove frivolous and benign, you take a risk, albeit a small one, every time you brush off one of these rumors. Here are some real-life examples I have experienced at some of my parks. And I quote, "Your contractor is dealing drugs. Your employee touches children. My neighbor has been stalking me. One of your residents is trying to sell my daughter into sex slavery." We investigated each one of those claims, and we found literally zero supporting evidence. We confronted every single accuser. The response almost identical in every case, which was something along the lines of, well, just look at him. Doesn't he look like a guy who could do something like that? People are going to make some outrageous assumptions, and they're going to do so because Delusions are human nature. And emotions are immensely powerful. In short, people are short-sighted and self-interested. They are going to do and say whatever they feel necessary in that moment and are not going to think about the long-term consequences. The truth is, you can't stop these rumors. And worst of all, word of mouth persuades oftentimes more than common sense. The rumor mill is like fire. It can nourish you if you harness it properly, or it can burn the entire village down. I want to reiterate this. In almost all cases, you are not going to give the rumor mill any attention. But when it is time, here are some ways to actually address the rumor mill. First, find the connectors and influencers within your community. You'll find that this is only a handful of people, and they have all the social status and influencing trust within the community. You need to find these people, and you need to treat them like gold. They wield a lot of power. Get out ahead of anything damaging. Some research I read recently suggested that the first time someone is exposed to information, they tend to form their opinion on the spot and then essentially never change that opinion. In other words, the person to first expose an individual to information typically stands the best chance of long-term influence over the perception of given event. Deliver consistency. Yes, emotion and word of mouth often trounce common sense, but not always. We have a motto in all of our properties: safety and cleanliness. We drill that into our tenants' rhetoric every time we get a chance to. That way, when an unfortunate event does occur, all of our tenants require from us is to hear the confidence in our voices and the comfort of consistency. My last bit of advice: heed this quote from Maya Angelou. I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Y'all, sometimes there is just no substitute for showing up in person on your property. Tenant disputes. People are going to disagree. Then people are going to try and use you and your influence to win their squabbles. I strongly recommend against ever getting involved in any capacity unless there is a direct violation of your motto. So, for example, in our motto, if there is a direct threat to safety or cleanliness of the community, we look at getting involved. And if this ever does happen where you feel you do need to get involved, remember, people are going to remember the way you made them feel. Make them feel important. Make them feel heard. Make it known that you are going to be hearing every side of the story. Then after you've heard everything and made your judgment, you need to be decisive and you need to be firm. And you also need to be ready to make some people angry, because tenant disputes are often, if not always, zero-sum games with one winner and one loser. Now, if there's any silver lining here, it's that actions speak louder than words. You'll find most threats are empty. So, for example, you do have to get involved. You have one clear winner, one clear loser. The loser talks about moving. Generally speaking, that never happens. But, like I said, it's better to not have enemies within the community, especially folks who are well connected. It's also important to note that no one is really ever against you. They're
only for themselves. That's one of my favorite quotes, and it's directly applicable here because people in these communities and in general are, what have you done for me lately? So you could have built up years and years and years of positivity between you two, and in that moment, if you are against their intentions and their interests, they hate you and curse you, and it's the exact opposite. It's always extremes. It's never shades of gray, and just know that in that moment, if you make someone really, really angry, yeah, they may not forget that. But at the same time, if you then go and benefit them somehow, all of a sudden it's completely flipped and it's on the opposite end of the extreme where you're awesome. I have gone through that roller coaster many a time with many a tenant.
Imagine this. You have a tenant-owned home that's not paying you. If someone can't pay you a few $100s for lot rent, what makes you think they're going to have thousands to move their home from the property? They won't. Now, this is a big selling point for mobile home parks as you have massive leverage as the property owner. But there is an ugly opposite end of that coin, which is if you do not handle this situation properly, you'll have an abandoned home on your property that you cannot sell and you cannot rent. The fastest I've seen an abandoned title be issued is 6 months. So that's a minimum of 6 months of no rent from said lot. Not to mention, the tenant will likely have been behind for a couple months or however long it takes to evict someone in your state, which essentially means for the better part of a year, you are not going to have any rent coming in. This sounds like a disaster, doesn't it? Well, the good news is, here's a few ways of how you can successfully avoid this issue. The most preferential way to do this is to broker a sale between the person moving out and someone who wants to move in. We have successfully pulled this off multiple times. When I said earlier to treat connectors like gold, this is a prime example of why you want to know who these people are and you want to treat them well, because boy, oh boy, they will make your life so easy in situations like this. Now, if you are unable to execute on this option, the next best option is to buy the home from the tenant. You have serious leverage here. And typically, people who are in a situation where they can't afford a few $100s for lot rent are in a place where they could use some serious cash. But even still, be prepared for a fight. These tenants are often like barnacles on a ship. Also, at least in North and South Carolina, you are not legally allowed to sell more than 2 used homes in a year without a dealer's license. And I bet you can imagine obtaining a license is a massive pain, not to mention it costs thousands of dollars. Then, once you have the license, you probably have a huge make-ready cost waiting for you, as people getting evicted typically don't leave their homes move-in ready for the next tenant. I'll reiterate this. Treat local connectors well, because brokering a sale is by far and away the most preferable way to handle this situation. The last option that I thankfully have never had to use is the tow away. Yes, there are mobile home movers that have land that can legally tow a mobile home away just like a car. I have no idea how this process works because I've never had to do it, but boy, is it effective to mention that to a barnacle to get them to the negotiation table. Bad news. Even if you own the homes with a clean title, things will still go wrong. I could do an entire episode on titles alone. Let's just say dealing with local governments can be like pulling teeth. We've had title submissions be rejected for the most trivial of errors. If you're buying a property with a lot of park-owned homes, you need to allot way more time than you think
to make sure every T is crossed and every I is dotted. And then be ready for some ridiculous roadblocks. For example, we closed Cherry Valley with 13 titles in January of 2017. As of late May 2018, we still have 0 of those titles in our name. Don't get me started with that one. We closed Countryside Mobile Home Park in February of 2018. Finally, as of May of 2018, we are just now getting all the titles into our name. My attorney did a wonderful job preparing all 45 titles, only to be met with a local DMV who told him, and I quote, "We only can accept 3 titles a day to process from any one individual." Mind you, this was after all 45 titles sat idle on the processor's desk for over 30 days, only to be mailed back to my attorney after he had to follow up with the guy just to find out what was taking so long. It didn't matter that everything was ready for this processor and was on his desk. That DMV forced my attorney to follow their ridiculously inefficient processes. Thank goodness my attorney had a champion's attitude about the whole situation. Otherwise, I'd be stuck in another Cherry Valley situation. Park-owned homes. I could probably create an entire podcast series for things that are likely to break in a mobile home. What you need are contractors you can trust, that are knowledgeable and reasonable on price. And show up. Not just show up on time. There is absolutely no secret to finding good contractors. You just have to grind through the local contractors until you find the best ones. For our Asheville property, I ended up calling over 30 plumbers to settle on just one guy. Getting back to park-owned homes, your biggest risk is the HVAC. AC units break often, frequently, and in some areas of the country, it can cost about $100 just to get someone to take a look at it. It'll cost you thousands to replace one. In our experience, roofing comes in a strong second place to HVACs. Shingles look great, but you will never look at them the same again after spending thousands to replace just one double wide. Poor plumbing can ruin a home. They say water is the universal solvent. That's an understatement. Water can ruin carpet, floors, plywood, OSB board, insulation, membrane, drywall, and so on and so on and so on, and can create so many biological issues for you as well. We once had to remove the side of a house just to reach a shower leak. You heard correctly. We literally had to repair a leak from the outside of the house in. Electrical issues, those can set you back big time as well. But thankfully, those issues have been far less common for me in my experience. Much more on that later. I'm glossing over a huge portion of my daily headaches here, so let me transition into some important park-owned home lessons. Yes, they're going to break frequently, no matter how good of a job you do fixing them, and it's just designed to break. There's no other way to put it. But there is an economic threshold for where a park-owned home model is actually more lucrative than a tenant-owned home model. For example, in Asheville, North Carolina, we can rent a double wide for $1,000 or more and seemingly have unlimited demand. The market lot rent for Asheville is only plus or minus $350. So as long as you keep your unit rented, you stand to profit plus or minus $550 a month or $6,600 per year. Yes, an HVAC or roofing issues with that home could wipe out an additional $6,600 of gross revenue, but with more risk comes more reward. Juxtapose that Asheville market with Atlanta. I can't rent my single wides for much more than $650 a month, and lot rents hover around $500 a month in some areas. Even if you round up to $800 a month for a single-wide rental. At $500 a month, that's only a delta of $300 a month or $3,600 a year of additional gross revenue on the high end. In other words, submarkets make a big difference as to the viability of your park-owned home model, tenant-owned home model, or hybrid of the two. Regardless, park-owned homes are operational time and money black holes. If you have the proper systems and proper people in place, you will, again, depending on the submarket, make more money. You will also guarantee to face more NOI variability. All things to take in consideration rather just taking dogma of, just got to do the tenant-owned homes. No, there are shades of gray in this industry, and park-owned home models can be extraordinarily successful. I want to acknowledge again that the bulk of this episode really each deserve an episode, if not an entire podcast series to and of themselves, but infrastructure and really utilities in general are the next thing that no matter what you're going to do, it's going to break. If you have paved roads, you'll eventually get potholes. If you have gravel roads, you'll eventually get those disgusting mud puddles. If you have light poles, the lights eventually will burn out, and it can take weeks, if not months, with plenty of follow-up calls on your part just to get the local power company to show up and fix their own lights. I'll include mailboxes and playgrounds in this segment. People are going to lose their keys if you have the lockable mailboxes, and you're just going to have to rekey frequently. Even if you charge $30 to do so, people will still lose their keys and pay you for it. Kids also are completely inconsiderate, and you're going to break swings and slides, so on and so forth. Don't even get me started on pools. I hate operating pools. We have had people from out of the neighborhood doing drugs at our pool, people cursing at children, people throwing all sorts of things into the pool, ranging from glass, which, by the way, you have to shut down the entire pool, to lawn chairs. We've had people jump in the fence and swimming when the pool is clearly closed, and so on and so on. I'm personally not convinced there's a significant economic benefit to having a pool, at least from an operational perspective. Perhaps you could make an argument that they attract a better tenant or help you obtain better debt terms, which there could be plenty of truth to that. But at our property with a pool, it is of minimal economic utility to prospective residents. For example, things that are more important to a resident include things like price, safety, cleanliness of the property, proximity to work and proximity to good schools, number of bedrooms, size of their yards. Plenty of stuff just literally just come to mind way before a pool. Lift stations. These are going to break. We've had our lift station break at Countryside because someone flushed a feminine hygiene product down the toilet. Thankfully, that pump was due for a replacement anyways, but still, people can be obnoxiously inconsiderate. Ideally, you find a property with directly billed city water, city sewer, in which you never really have to worry about the infrastructure, but if not, be ready. Also, see my prior episode on my own due diligence error. Underground leaks, they're going to happen. It pays to have a reliable plumber in your contacts list because in time, you will run into issues with water leaks. And these leaks are going to vary in magnitude. But at literally every park I operate and own the pipes, I have had some degree of infrastructure leakage. Submeters. Your park's master meter bill will inevitably be different than your tenant's individual water bills based on their submeter readings. There are various reasons for this, some benign. For example, if your readings and the county's readings don't occur in the same time lapse, there is going to be inherent instantaneous differences between the two readings, but on the year they should match, or at least
come reasonably close. And another really important thing to note is when submeters break, they break in favor of less usage rather than more. So if you have a big property, identifying the underperforming submeter would be like finding a needle in a haystack. Something you might never guess, however, is electrical infrastructure. If a pad has been vacant long enough, you will have to get the county inspector to give the local power company an okay to go ahead and turn the power back on at that location. I've had to spend up to $1,800 on just one pad to get it ready for someone to move in. This is something I now investigate during due diligence. Vacant pads are not upside. It can cost you roughly $10,000 to move, set up, install plumbing, electrical, skirting, decks, and HVAC on a new or used home just to bring one in to fill a pad. That's not to mention the actual rehab costs, if there are any, and additional costs associated with marketing or make ready or whatever. But it is really, really expensive to bring homes in. Also, not to mention, both the new and used home markets for mobile homes is just as frothy, if not arguably frothier, than the mobile home park market itself. I have heard that some people have been able to crack this code and achieve profitability, achieving upside by bringing homes in, but I have yet to figure that out. Private utilities. Now, I only have experience with septics, and I got to say my experience has totally spoiled me. They've got to be on pump schedules. If there's more than one home per septic, you have an accelerated pump schedule. Other than that, I've really not had any trouble with them. We had, not that this will break, but when we were doing our thing at Cherry Valley, the sewage line accidentally got cut to one of the septic tanks, and sewage was going everywhere. It was gross. It felt like a nightmare in the moment, but in retrospect, it really wasn't that big of a deal to address. Beyond septics, you have wells, wastewater, sewage lagoons. I really do not feel comfortable commenting on these despite having done research. Reason being is I don't have firsthand experience with this. But what I will say is that these tend to scare people. And when there is fear, there is opportunity. So I personally would strongly consider an opportunity with private utilities, assuming the proper due diligence was conducted and the risk accounted for. So how did Ian and I handle the shooting? We called the influencers. We wrote up a statement for both the press, which thankfully we didn't have to end up using, and for the tenants. We delivered the same consistent, familiar message we always do. And most importantly, we went to the property. We let people hear the confidence in our own voices in person. Y'all, I can't stress this enough. Showing your face, especially after an emotionally charged event, can be the difference in a nightmare and a mere speed bump. Studies have found positive correlations between doctors being sued for malpractice and bedside manner. There's no difference here. Make people feel important, make people feel safe, make people feel valued, and they'll reward you with their loyalty. They'll even fix what will go wrong and will break for you without you having to intervene. They'll self-police in many cases. To conclude, there's no way I can truly know if what Ian and I had done was the proper course of action. There are many reasons I say that, but I think the most important of which is after we investigated, we learned we ourselves had been the victims of the rumor mill. The whole situation turned out to be completely blown out of proportion. Ian and I arguably went totally overkill on the attention we gave it. But I will say this. Despite a rough rumor mill the day of, we had 3 showings for a vacant home the very next day. And 2 of those were referrals from the connector that originally sent me that text message. So, yes, people overreact and over-dramatize events. But God forbid, if the event had been a super serious issue, Ian and I felt we had a solid plan of action and we were ready to go. Things will never go perfectly, but taking action based on your known knowns is infinitely better than just winging it. Things are going to break, y'all. Are you going to be ready to go when they do? Did my podcast help you? Please help me too by joining the many of your fellow listeners who have also left me a 5-star review. It helps. Big time. Connect with me. This episode was actually inspired by a phone call I had with a listener. I'm actively looking for your feedback. Help me help you. Drop me a line on my website, www.archimedesgrp.com. I look forward to hearing from you.